We were all shaken, trying to rationalize what had just happened. As we drove away from the trailhead, no one spoke. The silence between us was heavy, a shared discomfort that none of us could shake. The streets of the nearby town felt too bright, too busy. We hadn't realized how much the isolation of the mountains had affected us until we were back in civilization, but even the hum of the engine and the chatter of passing cars couldn't ease the tension that gripped me. That night, I tried to forget about the encounter. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a lost hiker maybe, someone who had wandered off the trail and was just as freaked out by our presence as we were by his. But the more I tried to brush it off, the more the details of the day seemed to haunt me. I couldn't get the image of his eyes out of my head. There was something unnatural about them, like they were seeing right through me. And why had he been barefoot? We had seen no signs of a campfire or any other hikers for miles. He didn't belong out there. A week passed, and I thought I was getting back to normal. That is, until I got a text from one of my friends, Claire, who had been with me on the hike. Her message was simple but unnerving. Did anyone else notice the footprints leading off the trail that day? I thought I saw something more after we left. My heart skipped a beat. Had she been having the same thoughts I'd been trying to suppress? I texted her back, asking for details. Her reply came quickly. I don't know. But I did some research. There have been reports about people seeing strange figures in those woods before, especially on the older forgotten paths. People have gone missing there. Some say it's a legend, but I don't think so anymore. I felt a chill run through me. The Appalachian Trail was known for its beauty, yes, but it also held its share of dark tales. Stories about things that didn't belong, things that watched hikers from the shadows. Some said it was just superstition. Others whispered about an ancient force tied to the land, guarding its secrets. The following weekend, I couldn't resist. I drove back to the area, alone this time. I wasn't sure if I was hoping to find answers or if I just needed closure, but I knew I had to return. I stood at the trailhead for what felt like an eternity, staring into the woods, the memory of the figure creeping into my thoughts. I started down the same narrow path, but this time, I was more cautious. The air was still and heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As I walked deeper into the woods, I felt that same unsettling feeling from the previous week, like something was following me, something watching from the trees. And then I found it. The footprints. They were exactly as I remembered, barefoot, large, and oddly shaped. But this time, they were more than just tracks in the dirt. They were leading deeper into the forest, further than I had dared to go before. I hesitated, my pulse racing, but something compelled me to follow. The path twisted and turned, becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. The trees closed in around me, and the sounds of the forest faded away, leaving only the sound of my breath and the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I rounded a bend, and there he was again, the man. But this time, he wasn't standing still. He was moving, slowly, methodically, weaving through the trees with a strange, unnatural grace. His eyes locked onto mine the moment he saw me, and he didn't look away. I could see now that his clothes were torn, as if he had been out there for much longer than any of us had realized. His skin was pale, almost ashen, and his movements were stiff, like he hadn't walked in years. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though something was rooting me to the spot. He began to approach slowly, with a calm that unnerved me even more. His eyes didn't hold the fear or wildness I had expected. They were empty, void of emotion. I couldn't breathe. I had to get away. Just as he was within arm's reach, something snapped within me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. The rustling in the trees behind me was louder this time, more persistent. I could feel him gaining on me, but I couldn't stop. The woods were a blur of movement, a maze of trees that seemed to stretch on forever. I reached the trailhead, breathless, disoriented, and filled with a primal sense of terror. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't look back. It's been months since that day, and I've never returned to the Appalachian trails. Every time I close my eyes, I see his eyes, and I hear the sound of his footsteps in the forest, getting closer. Whatever he was Whatever he wanted, it wasn't human, and I'm not sure I ever want to find out. I've learned one thing: some paths are better left untraveled. I've always been a solo hiker, preferring the solitude of the wilderness. There's something peaceful about being alone in the forest, where your only companions are the sounds of nature. I had planned a weekend hike in the White Mountains, an area I had visited before, so I felt comfortable navigating the trails. The familiarity of the place was supposed to be comforting, a break from the noise and bustle of the outside world. The first day was uneventful. The sky was clear, the air cool, and I had the trail all to myself. I had come to appreciate the quiet moments in nature, where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves, the birds calling overhead, and the occasional scamper of a small animal darting through the underbrush. By evening, I found a great spot to camp by a small creek. The gentle burbling of the water was a perfect backdrop as I set up my tent, cooked some dinner, and as night fell, I settled in with a book, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. I had heard something, a sound coming from the woods, distant at first, but then closer. Footsteps, heavy, slow footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. At first, I thought it was a bear or some other animal, but as I strained my ears to listen more closely, I realized that this wasn't the random sound of an animal searching for food or wandering through the woods. These footsteps were deliberate, slow, and rhythmic. Too steady to be a creature in the woods. I was confused, as I was sure I was the only one on this part of the trail. The area I had camped in was remote, far from the main trails. I peeked outside my tent, my breath catching in my throat as I scanned the dark expanse of trees. But I saw nothing. No movement, no shadows. Just the stillness of the night. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me in the dead of night. But then the sound returned, this time louder, as if someone was circling my camp. The footsteps weren't steady. They sounded like someone dragging their feet, as though the person was tired or injured. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. At that point, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickly packed up my things, heart racing, and decided to head back to the trailhead before dawn. I grabbed my backpack, my flashlight, and began walking back the way I came, trying to keep my footsteps light and quiet. But something felt off. The trail, usually so clear and well marked, felt unfamiliar. The trees seemed to close in around me, their dark silhouettes shifting in the light of my flashlight. The path I was following didn't look familiar. The landmarks I had passed earlier, boulders, a fallen tree, a distinctive curve in the creek, were nowhere to be seen. I checked my map, but it was no use. The terrain had changed, and I was disoriented. My pulse quickened as I continued walking, the only sounds now being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig. The forest felt unnervingly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The deeper I ventured, the more the trail seemed to shift and change. The trees grew thicker, the ground rougher, and the air colder. It was as though I had wandered into a place that didn't belong on the map. Hours passed, and by sunrise, I was no closer to the trailhead. The weight of the situation started to settle in, and panic began to set in. That's when I heard the voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "You're lost." The voice wasn't loud, but it was distinct, and it froze me in my tracks. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the dark expanse of trees. But no one was there. My heart raced. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. There was no one else around, and yet, someone had spoken. Someone who knew I was lost. The voice lingered in my mind, echoing like a distant warning. I knew I had to get out of these woods, but every direction seemed unfamiliar. I was trapped, or worse, I was being led further into the wilderness by something, or someone, who knew the trail better than I did. The whisper lingered in my ears, making it impossible to focus. "You're lost," it repeated. The sun had climbed higher by the time I realized I had no idea where I was. My mind started to play tricks on me. Landmarks that had been familiar, just hours ago, now looked like strangers. Trees that had once seemed like clear markers now seemed indistinct and distorted. I tried retracing my steps, but it felt like the forest was shifting, moving, adapting to keep me off the path. As the day wore on, exhaustion took hold. I stumbled through the thick woods, my legs heavy, my mind foggy. My thoughts became jumbled as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It wasn't until late afternoon, when I stumbled into a clearing, that I felt a glimmer of hope. The familiar rock formations, the one I had passed when I first started my hike, were a welcome sight. I couldn't believe it. I had found my way back to the main trail, but I didn't stop to rest. I didn't even take a moment to breathe. I just kept walking, my feet moving almost mechanically, driven by an overwhelming need to get out of those woods. The air felt colder now, and the shadows grew long, but I didn't care. I didn't dare look back. When I finally reached the parking lot, the sense of relief that washed over me was indescribable. I didn't even stop to check my gear. I just got in my car and drove away without looking back. That experience still haunts me. The trail I was on shouldn't have been so disorienting, and I never figured out why the landmarks were gone. The voice still echoes in my mind, and I've never hiked alone since. I always make sure to stay on well-marked paths, and I take extra precautions when venturing into areas I've never explored before. There's a part of me that still wonders what happened that day. Was it the forest playing tricks on me? Or something, or someone, more sinister, using the wilderness to guide me into its trap? I don't know. All I know is that I'm never hiking alone again. Not for the minute. My group of friends and I had been planning this hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains for weeks. The area was famous for its jaw-dropping landscapes, rugged peaks that scraped the sky, dense forests that seemed to stretch on forever, and pristine lakes so clear they mirrored the world around them. It was a much-needed weekend getaway, a break from our hectic lives. We were eager to leave behind the noise of the city and immerse ourselves in the beauty and tranquility of nature. On the second day of our hike, after a long trek through towering pines and over rocky ridges, we stumbled upon something unexpected. Hidden deep in the forest, obscured by thick underbrush and towering trees, stood an old cabin. It looked like it had been standing there for decades, weathered and worn by time. The wooden walls were darkened with age, and the roof sagged as though it might collapse at any moment. The windows were shattered, the glass long gone, and the front door hung askew on its hinges, swaying gently in the breeze. Despite its eerie, abandoned appearance, something about the place drew us in. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. As we stepped inside, a heavy silence enveloped us. The air was thick with the musty smell of mildew and decay, and the dim light filtering through the broken windows only added to the cabin's foreboding atmosphere. Every step we took on the creaky floorboards seemed to echo, amplifying the unsettling quiet. The walls, which should have been bare, were covered in strange, indecipherable symbols. They were carved deep into the wood, intricate and precise, almost as though they had been etched by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The fireplace in the center of the room was filled with remnants of ash, though no fire had been lit there in years. On the worn wooden table, a few items caught my attention. A filthy, torn blanket lay haphazardly across the surface, as though it had been tossed there in a hurry. Piled next to it were several old newspapers, their edges yellowed and curling with age, the print faded and illegible. But what sent a shiver down my spine was a rusted knife, its blade chipped and stained, abandoned as if it had been dropped without a second thought. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, we couldn't help but explore further. As I moved deeper into the cabin, I began to notice something that made my blood run cold. On the dust-covered floor near the back door, there were footprints, fresh ones. They weren't ours. They were too distinct, the edges sharp as though they had been made moments ago, not days or weeks earlier. "Hey guys," I called out, turning back to my friends, my voice unsteady. But there was no response. The cabin seemed emptier now, quieter. I stepped toward the entrance, my heart racing as I looked around the room, but my friends were nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through me as I called their names, but only the wind answered, its mournful whistle seeping through the cracks in the cabin's walls. I stepped outside into the cool mountain air, hoping to find my friends nearby, but the forest around me was eerily silent. The familiar trail that we had been following seemed so far away now, as though it had disappeared. I felt lost, disoriented. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches rustling with the wind, but nothing else stirred. It was as if time itself had paused. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not from the forest, but from behind me. Slow and deliberate, they seemed to be getting closer. My body froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I spun around, expecting to see one of my friends, but the clearing behind me was empty. The footsteps had stopped. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck as I realized something was wrong. I bolted back toward the trail, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and the forest around me seemed to close in, the trees twisting into unnatural shapes as I ran. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, just out of sight, but always there. When I finally reached the main road, my friends were waiting by the car. They looked confused, even worried, but they were all accounted for. They had never seen me leave the cabin. "What happened to you?" one of them asked, their voice filled with concern. "We've been waiting here for ages. We thought you'd be right behind us." I could barely find the words to explain. I looked back at the forest, the shadows of the trees still lingering in the distance. The cabin felt like a distant memory, but the chill in my spine hadn't gone away. I tried to shake it off, but something inside me knew I could never return to those woods. We never spoke of the cabin again, and none of us ever ventured back into that part of the Cascade Mountains. The strange symbols, the footprints, the feeling of being watched, it all felt too real to be dismissed as just our imagination. Even now, I can't help but wonder who, or what, had been there before us. And I can't help but feel that something is still out there, waiting in the woods. To this day, I can't explain what happened that day in the cabin. It's a mystery that has haunted me, a shadow that follows me in my dreams. No matter how much I try to forget, the memory of the footprints, the strange symbols, and the feeling of being watched lingers, like a presence I can't escape. I never went hiking in those mountains again, and I don't think I ever will. Hiking is often portrayed as a peaceful retreat into the heart of nature, a way to disconnect from the chaos of daily life and find solace in the quiet of the woods. For many, it's the perfect opportunity to enjoy the beauty of the great outdoors, breathe in the fresh air, and let the world's troubles fade away. But as we've seen in these true stories, the wilderness holds more than just breathtaking views and serene landscapes. Sometimes, it harbors dark, unsettling secrets that are better left untouched. There's something about the isolation of the forest, the vastness of the terrain, and the quiet that makes you realize just how small we are in the grand scheme of nature. It's in these moments of solitude that your mind can play tricks on you, making you question what's real and what's imagined. And sometimes, those tricks aren't in your mind at all. From the silent watcher who stalked the hikers, to the inexplicable disappearance of a well-known trail, and the haunting encounter with the abandoned cabin, these stories remind us that the wilderness can be unpredictable, even terrifying. What may seem like a normal hike can quickly turn into an encounter with the unknown, where every creak in the trees, every rustling in the leaves, and every shadow in the distance could be something, someone, lurking, watching, or waiting. Perhaps what's most unsettling about these experiences is that they leave us with more questions than answers. Who was the man in the woods? What was the source of the strange, disorienting energy that changed the very landscape? And what was behind the eerie presence in the abandoned cabin? We may never know, and that uncertainty is what makes these stories so haunting. Sometimes, the scariest part of an encounter isn't the immediate danger. It's the fact that we're left with no closure, no explanation, just the lingering sense that something is out there, waiting for us to come back. For those of us who venture into the wild, these stories serve as a reminder to trust our instincts. The wilderness can be as beautiful as it is dangerous, and while we may think we know it well, the truth is, there's always something we don't understand. So when something feels off, when you sense you're not alone, or when the path ahead starts to look unfamiliar, it's okay to turn back. It's okay to listen to that gut feeling and make sure you're safe. Remember, the world is full of unexplained phenomena, and sometimes nature itself holds mysteries that we aren't meant to uncover. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it from a safe distance, respecting its power, its beauty, and its hidden stories. And then, thank you for joining me on these chilling hikes through the unknown. I hope these stories made you think twice the next time you venture into the woods, reminding you that sometimes the most dangerous thing out there is not the animals or the elements, but the eerie, unsettling forces that might be watching from the shadows. So before you set off on your next adventure, take a moment to reflect. Stay aware, stay cautious, and most importantly, stay safe. You never know what might be lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Until next time, remember that the wilderness can be as haunting as it is beautiful. Tread carefully and listen to the whispers of the forest, for they might just be telling you to go back,